And now to introduce our 2 o'clock Interfaith lecture series here in the Hall of Philosophy, where this week we're presenting the theme, Spirituality in an Age of Anxiety. Our distinguished guest today is Artemis A.W. Joukowsky III. The Department of Religion is especially pleased to partner with the Unitarian Universalist Meadville Lombard Theological School on a series of programs that are anchored by the film and the work of today's speaker. Artemis has led a rich and varied vocational life as an environmental venture capitalist, entrepreneur, and nonprofit activist. In the last 20 years, he has devoted his professional life to producing films. It is his work as a PBS producer and co-director with Ken Burns of the documentary film and companion book, Defying the Nazis, The Sharps' War, that brings him to Chautauqua today. The 2016 documentary tells the story of the Unitarian minister, Waitstill Sharp, did I pronounce that correctly? And his wife, Martha, who played a role in the relief and rescue of displaced and endangered World War II refugees, including many Jews. In 1939 in Prague and in 1940 in southern France. If you're not one of the 3.5 million people who have seen the critically acclaimed film, it will be screened tonight at 6 o'clock in our own Chautauqua cinema. It is not a coincidence that the Sharps are Mr. Joukowsky's grandparents. And yet, he did not make the film simply to tell this very personal story. Everything he does is in the larger service of education and justice making. To that end, he organized numerous strategic alliances in conjunction with the film, including those with 20 leading Holocaust and education organizations worldwide who promote the rescue of refugees today. One of those important alliances is with the Venerable Meadville Lombard Theological School, which partnered with Mr. Joukowsky to create an experiential educational curriculum titled We Who Defy Hate, which is designed to support people of different faith traditions who want to find places of common ground and solidarity to further social justice. Later in this very session, Mr. Joukowsky will introduce one of the principal authors of the curriculum, Dr. Mark Hicks of Meadville Lombard's Angus MacLean Professor of Religious Education and director of the school's, Faith and Formation Collaborative. Together, they will invite you to experience the curriculum today, and you'll have that opportunity at 3:30, from 3:30 to 5 p.m. in the Hall of Christ, just across the Grove. We're most grateful to the Lincoln Applied Ethics Program for sponsorship of today's Interfaith lecture. You'll also be pleased to know that Artemis will do a book signing today immediately after this lecture on the porch of the Hall of Missions, and that his book will be sold there as well. But I must offer this word of regret that immediately following the book signing, due to his demanding schedule, Artemis will need to depart at that time. His presentation today is titled, The Liberation of the Human Spirit. I ask you all to join me in providing Artemis Joukowsky with a warm Chautauqua welcome.
What an honor to be here, and thank you for that warm introduction. I have been dreaming of this day for longer than I can remember, and really, the moment this possibility showed up, I have been seeing your faces and seeing your energy and feeling the good spirit that Chautauqua represents. So thank you for welcoming me here with such an open heart. Thank you. I want to start by reading a prayer, and actually would invite you to close your eyes or open your eyes. Grab someone's hand if you know them or don't know them, but just take a moment to reflect on something that I'll read for everyone, and this will give the spirit of my talk. God of all people, all nature, all creation, we come before you in this day to ask for the healing of our hungry, hurting, and war-weary world. We come confessing our deep divisions and our failure to make peace a priority in our hearts, in our families, in our communities, in our nation, and in the world. We need in our hearts, we come in prayer. Our sorrow for lives lost and hearts broken overwhelm us. We turn to you, we turn to us, and we make us all the agents of our peace. So before you get too focused on me, what we're going to do today is talk about the liberation of the human spirit. And each of you is going to have a different notion of what that liberation looks like in your lives. And that was my grandfather's most important statement about himself, was that he was committed to the liberation of the human spirit. Now, it's a little bit obscure what that means. I think that's a kind of a trick Unitarian thing we do to kind of keep you on your feet. But really the spirit of that is we as Unitarians don't want you to become a Unitarian per se. We actually love that you're Jewish or you're Catholic or you're Protestant, you're Methodist. We want you to actually bring your Methodism, your Judaism into a Unitarian spirit of togetherness. So Unitarianism starts with that premise. Of all the founding, in quote, fathers of our revolution, there's only one father that did not own slaves. Which one was that? Anyone know? John Adams. So only one. I don't know why. He was from the state of Massachusetts, but something had happened in Massachusetts before that they were also responding to. And there was a new call for justice there. And it started something, I think, called the revolution. Yeah. So that's what I want to invite you all to do, is come, like Emma Goldman would say, with your dancing shoes to the revolution. And the invitation is to liberate your spirit. And my belief, and I'm going to tell you a story about why I come to this belief, is that really, on a very simple basis, love is that liberation. Love of family, love of friends, love of institutions like Chautauqua, love of churches, love of communities, love of the world. And imagine having a love of the world that was so big that every child that was suffering around the world right now, we ached, just like that ding on my phone. We ached. Imagine how painful that would be. There was an amazing film done by Jerry Lewis many years ago. This is my daughter, who doesn't know I'm speaking. I love you with all my heart. I have to call you back. Sorry, that's probably never happened here. I apologize. She's not part of my PR schedule yet, but very soon. She does have a word for all of you, and it's about doing one good deed a day and putting it on Instagram. And she has challenged her entire generation to post not their bikini picture, not their I am in the sun all day doing nothing except myself all day picture, but no, this is the beach I cleaned up. This is the friend I went on and visited. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that legacy of love that comes through my veins and now is in my daughter's veins right now. And she actually was calling to remind me of her hashtag, which is Go Rock. Go Rock. So it's all about kids rocking out, doing good things together. So I want to bring you, sadly, to a time in history that's much worse than today, 1939. And I just want you to close your eyes again and invite you to imagine, even if you don't remember that time in movies or photos, you remember it in your spirit of your family. You remember the family member who fought, or the uncle, or the family you left in Europe, wherever you're from. Just go back to that time. And I'm going to turn off my phone. Which, by the way, I don't want you to do. Keep your phones on. We're going to tweet later, but right now we're not going to do that. So just go back to 1939. And this is, I think, one of the worst periods of world history. I mean, we can all agree that this war that we eventually won through the loss of so many brave people was won because we had to. Because imagine a world where Nazi fascism won, and that was it. That was the world we're living in. So these two people were invited by the head of the Unitarian Church, Martha and Wessel Sharp. They were invited because their church in Prague was overwhelmed with refugees. And they said, don't send us money, send us Americans. Don't send us money, send us Americans. Now, why would they say that? Well, at that time in world history, the only thing, apparently, according to the Czechs, that the Nazis were afraid of were Americans. And 17 ministers were asked of the Unitarian Church, and they all said no. And they were the 18th choice. Now, for those who know Jewish numerology, 18 is a very important number. And someone would just say out what it is. Life. Let's say that together. Life. So they were the 18th choice. And they went. They left my mom. They left my uncle. And they went into this world that none of us can imagine. Certainly not Chautauqua. Not a vacation. They left the care of their children in the hands of other Unitarians in their congregation. And they said, we'll take care of your kids, you go. And like many missionaries who have done that in the past, that was a reasonable offer, given what was at stake. But little did they know, when they arrived in Prague, they were arriving into the kingdom of hell, literally. If there is a hell, it was that period in the whole Central Europe. And everyone was being attacked, everyone. And they did not make a distinction ever in their work to save people, what nationality or background or religion you were. They focused largely on children. And the most amazing part is in the research I've done on my film and this story is I've met some of those children who are now a little older than children now, but one of them is sitting right in the front row of this amphitheater. Peter Braunfeld. So if everyone just acknowledged him for a minute. He and his wife Judy have been coming to Chautauqua for 22 years. And so we're going to tell part of his story today in our film, Defying the Nazis, which I produced with Ken Burns. And his family story is part of that history, and he'll be speaking after that. So if you want to hear someone who lived through this hell as a child, he was 7 years old when he escaped. And that's such a miracle. My grandparents didn't actually rescue his family. They helped his father and mother organize their visas to get out. And others helped, the Quakers. And what you learn in a story like Peter's is not one group did this work. There were many groups of people that my grandparents worked with. Prague was a center of social democracy in the world. And the history of Prague is very interesting because a man named Thomas Masaryk was the first elected president after World War I. And he brought in civil institutions that, of course, were being destroyed. And so all the people my grandparents worked with were part of that underground. And the Quakers and the Unitarians and this group of dissidents who believed that human life was important to save. And you know this wonderful saying, it's in the Talmud, it's in the Quran, and it's in the Bible. To save one life is to save humanity. And that's what they were doing. And the more they started to help people, the more invested they got to help more people. And it was the love that grew for these desperate people. They couldn't leave. They also knew that they had to get home. You know, they had 2 children. And so part of the balance, I think, was how to stay alive, how to do it in a judicious way, but also how to save as many people as they could. And then for 9 months, rescued, I think, 400 to 500 that we can document. And that's not the kind of rescue that Peter's family went through. So many other people were helped. And almost every week I get phone calls from families who have discovered their documents and said, oh, your grandparents helped buy an $8 ticket to Genoa. And from Genoa, we got to Shanghai. And now we want to thank you. You know, we want to come and thank you. And for my grandparents, it wasn't ever about the gratitude, because I think they felt so sad that so many people couldn't be saved. And I think lived with a sense of horror, that this war was really something that we could never allow happen again. Then they came home, and they tried to advocate for the U.S. to get involved in World War II. They begged the government. And here they were pacifists. They were Unitarians, and now they're advocating war. And they said, no, this is not like any moment in time. This is a moment where we have to fight this war. And I think that's the most interesting thing about my grandparents, is that their flexibility of thinking. And ultimately, they were very intimate with what they were talking about. They weren't just talking of politics in a global sense. They were talking about people they knew, and they were talking about names that they were trying to get out of this situation into another. Much of their work was bureaucratic. They had to focus on visas. They had to focus on how do you get person A from this place to another place. And so very unromantic work, really, but you have to get those documents right. And they would go with their potential professors, economists, writers, and they would go to London University and say, we have these candidates. Can you give us a visiting professorship? We can save their lives if they come. And they were able to do that with about 1,000 academics. Imagine that. You know, this room of people were saved by people just going around with documents saying, please give these people a visa. And I think in that period, what also happened to them is they understood racism, the anti-Semitic form of racism, but they found it to be the same thing in every context, whether it was about Jews or blacks or other people, whoever it was, whoever that other was. Ultimately, they found it to be about ignorance and meanness. And so their task often was to shift the conversation, because in staying alive, they couldn't expose who they were, but they had to find those, in a sense, points of light that would support them. And one of the things they did was start to launder money. Now imagine my grandfather, a Unitarian, a Harvard Law School graduate, is in the back of a basement taking in money. But this is what he does. The person who is most desperate, and at that point they identified that as being Jewish, would get the best rate of exchange, not the worst rate of exchange. So here they were using money, even in that moment, to help people who were the most in danger. And as they saw that endangerment, and as they saw that anti-Semitism, and as they saw that abuse, and as all the people they worked around were taken to Dachau, they became, I think, overwhelmed by what they couldn't do. And that's how they left that journey. And they came home, and my mom, who was 2, and my uncle, who was 6, didn't know a thing about what they had been through. Obviously suffering from post-traumatic stress, obviously dealing with a lot of frustrations, but never stopping their work, continuing to advocate for about 25,000 cases at that point. And the Unitarians and the Quakers and many faith groups in America were involved in that work. But really, credit goes to the Unitarians and the Quakers. They were extraordinary. And their work is never acknowledged because Unitarians really almost by nature don't market themselves very well. It's kind of part of the religion. You know, we just want to be wanted. We just want to be part of your lives. And I think this film changes some of that conversation because if you look at the history of Unitarianism, it all comes from justice. The whole movement of Unitarianism comes from standing up to oppression. And really that's what this story at its core is about. So they come home, they're in America advocating, and the Unitarians are even more desperate. Now Prague is cut off. There's no one coming out of the center of Europe. France is now being threatened, and they decide to go to Portugal. And they set up operations in Lisbon and organize through a car that's given to them by an American. This is one of the most beautiful things. All these Americans who show up in this story that no one's ever heard of. And they give them a car. And imagine, Spain has been destroyed by Franco. There's been a civil war for 3 years. So they have to go from Lisbon all the way to southern France. And you can't just do that simply by going on highways. You're going around areas that have been destroyed. And after days and days, they get to France, and their visas are now the wrong dates. And with them is a shipload of milk for children and babies. And my grandmother, and this is kind of the passion of this woman. You think of Eleanor Roosevelt. You think of, tremendously powerful women. All of you here being powerful, beautiful women, saying, well, if you were the recipient of this milk for your children, would you let this milk shipment in? And the border guard says, yes, I would. And that's how she got the border guard to get the milk shipment in. So it's, this kind of love of others, this love of spirit, this love of the community that she believed in. And then that work, I think, was more difficult. There were fewer people they could get out, but they were able to help establish an underground railroad that went over the Pyrenees and to Lisbon and then out. And on that, Varian Fry was a partner. The government, actually, with a man named Hiram Bingham in Marseille, was a partner. And yes, please acknowledge Hiram Bingham. I mean, what a hero. A neighbor. And they helped to rescue another 1,000 great intellectuals. Hannah Arendt was rescued from that network. Marc Chagall. Henry Bertin. These are people, Gallo Mann, the brother of Heinrich Mann. And the big rescue my grandparents participated on was a man named Leon Feuchtwanger and his wife, Martha, who were outspoken anti-Nazis, Jews. He was a great writer in German and was singled out on a list by the Nazis to be killed. And it's described in the film. So I encourage you to watch that piece because it's so thrilling. I think when they came back, they felt they had to do more. They predicted that this would happen. They felt terrible that it did. And I think when the war ended, their work shifted to civil rights. It shifted to how to build a state of Israel, how to support the resettlement of Jews. Thank goodness they had so much passion to keep doing such good work in the world. And when I grew up as a child, even though they had done this, they divorced. And I never saw them together. I was born in Italy, Milan, Italy, and then grew up in Beirut, in Lebanon, lived through the 6-Day War, moved to Hong Kong, and then came to America, and I didn't know my grandparents. And I was in the 9th grade, and I was given an assignment to interview someone of moral courage. So I go home and I say, Mom, who should I speak to? And she said, well, go talk to your grandmother. She did some very cool things during World War II. And little did I know this woman had literally outwitted the Nazis and had did this remarkable work, and she had never talked about this story, never. And I decided at that point this was going to be the subject of my 9th grade history project, and I interviewed her, and it was the only A I ever got in high school. So it was a very proud moment for me. But more importantly, I was now engaged with my mentor, with my teacher. And as she would tell these stories of what she went through, she would encourage me in my way to be more courageous. And this notion of moral courage became part of our dialogue. And who were the people of moral courage today? Who were the people that inspired you? And these were the kind of questions she would ask me all the time. And I would say to her, it's pretty hard for me to go to school, how do I go forward? She said, what are you going to do that's great in your life? And I said, well, how about graduate from the 8th grade? She said, no, we're talking about something greater than that. Like, what is your spirit? What are you here to do? So I feel very much that I've completed this promise that I made to her. And I've written a book about their lives. And if you can see just a glimpse of their beautiful spirits, there they are on the top. I know it's far away. And on the bottom are some of the children they rescued. And so this book was really dedicated not just to them, but all the people who could not be saved. You think of the lives that were lost, the potentiality of each person. So it changed my life, and at that same time in my life, I was diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease called spinal muscular atrophy. And this disease largely kills people who get it before you're 2 years old. And I had a very mild form of the disease. And I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. And I was in the hospital, and she'd come and say, you know what, we're not going to feel sorry for ourselves. We're going to go connect with other people. And we'd go to the Boys and Girls Club. And I started a support group for my disease. And before you know it, I wasn't feeling sorry for myself. It had changed me, that I wasn't the focus of my own suffering, that I was the focus of the love that I could give others. And I think really that's the lesson of this liberation of the human spirit that my grandfather spoke about. It's about living large. It's about living with your heart. It's about feeling the pulsations of your being. It's about intimacy. The intimacy where you can't continue the conversation now, but you're going to come back to it. It's about important things like who is morally courageous today and how do we help them? What is the moral courage that I can take? What can I do in my life that would push me beyond the comfort zone of who I am? And it led me in my life to be focused on my disease, but also focused on the courage to overcome. And I produced a book with the United Nations. This is with Kofi Annan, called Raising the Bar. This became the biggest event at the United Nations to celebrate a new human rights convention that we supported, very much framed on Eleanor Roosevelt's Declaration of Human Rights about people with disabilities. I just want to show you one picture. Just get a vibe of that guy. Father of 3, gold medal winner. And so I became interested in these stories of courage. And where were they? And they were everywhere. Police stations, schools, hospitals. Those are the places you find them most readily. Emergency rooms. But then you go deeper and you go into schools and you see guidance counselors having those tough conversations with kids. And you see that moral courage. And you start to see that moral courage is everywhere. And that moral courage is something we all can evoke. And we all have inspirations, like my grandparents, who are my teachers of moral courage. But, think of the people who've come to Chautauqua, Margaret Mead, Martin Luther King, people who had that sense of moral courage. And so that's what I really invite all of you to consider. And the reason we're ending our conversation kind of with a workshop is not to engage you in a workshop per se, but we really want to look at what each of us can do in our own lives. What are the lessons we have? Who are those family members that we don't know about who had the courage to leave where they were, or to overcome the ravages of slavery, or to overcome the persecution of Native people? Who are those people in those communities that inspired us to move on, to create the life that we have today, to build this extraordinary place? And I think we need to build those institutions together. I think one of the things my grandparents really believed in, and why I wanted to work with the UN on this project, was that institutions matter. That it's not just a collection of people, that the institution stands for something bigger. And in some ways, like how we view God, that it's a bigger spirit than all of us together, that we're part of something bigger. And that's what Chautauqua is so beautiful to me, and why working with these gentlemen at Meadville Lombard was such a transformational experience for me. Because I wanted my film to touch the civil rights movement. I wanted my film to talk about any kind of enslavery, whether any kind of genocide. I wanted my film to be a lesson of human courage that could be translated, and we could talk about the Dalai Lama. We could talk about people who have taken stands in the world for something bigger than themselves. One of my films recently was about the Dalai Lama. I supported a man named Mickey Lemley. And the Dalai Lama is questioning whether he should be reincarnated, because he knows if he is, the Chinese government could take that child away and take it as their own. So that's what he's struggling with. It's not obviously about him. It's about the future of Zen, of Tibetan Buddhism and the freedom of his people. And I think that's where the transformation happens, when in a kind of spirit of connection, we bring our Unitarian world, or we bring our Methodist world, or we bring our Catholic world together into a conversation where 1 + 1 = 3, where we can talk about who are the Muslims today that inspire us, who are the Jews today that inspire us, but not to make them separate, to actually show their connection. And I think that's the Chautauqua spirit that I feel very excited to be a part of. And I think with Meadville Lombard, we have a curriculum that really goes to this notion of interfaith. What does it mean to have a conversation where each of you can listen to each other in a new spirit, where we're crossing a boundary, where we're sharing initially, this is who I am, this is my inspiration, but we're going deeper. Where are the connections between us? And you look at Abraham, the father of these 3 religions, and go to that spirit of connection that we have lost and that we need to refine. And so that's really the spirit of my grandparents' work. That's really the spirit of what we're trying to do. I think it's very much the spirit of Chautauqua and the UN and other institutions I've had the privilege to work with. And really, what I invite each of you to think about is, what does that mean in your lives today? And how does that story translate for you in the world we live in today? And really, that's the spirit of my talk. Thank you for your profound attention. We're now going to shift to another conversation, and then we'll come back with questions and answers after.
Thank you, Artemis. I'm Lee Barker, and I'm president and a professor of ministry at Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago. I will confess we do not have one course in money laundering or passport forgery, but we are seriously thinking about adding it to the curriculum. I want to thank Artemis both for his beautiful film and for the partnership that we have created together, and of course also to the Chautauqua Department of Religion, Robert, Maureen, for partnering with us on these series of events over the next few days. We don't have that course in money laundering, but we do teach our students and leaders, religious leaders of all sorts, to build spiritually based multi-faith alliances that bring about social justice. And that was the primary reason that Artemis came knocking at our door. The idea was to develop a companion curriculum whereby everyday people like you and me, could engage in structured conversations that move people of multiple faiths from the point of not knowing one another to the point of doing social justice together. You know, I've been coming to Chautauqua for almost 10 years now myself, and I know that Chautauquans are not of a common mind. Chautauquans are, however, of a common question. And that question over and over and over again is, what can I do about this world of ours? What can I do? What is the one thing I should be doing? The curriculum that we've developed in partnership with Artemis, available to each and every one of you for free, is something to be done. Each person can take a piece of this curriculum back home to your faith communities, to your not faith communities, to your families, and begin to really get to know one another in your religious diversity, and to begin to act together to create out of moral courage, to create a new world. It is truly in the spirit of the Sharps, it's in the spirit of defying the Nazis, and it's in the spirit of Artemis Joukowsky's life itself. The principal architect of the curriculum, and as I say, you're all going to get a very unique opportunity to sample this curriculum today. The principal architect is our school's professor of faith and formation, our Angus MacLean professor of religious education, Dr. Mark Hicks, and I'm going to let him have a few words with you right now. Mark?
Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Artemis, for giving us an opportunity to move into this conversation with purpose and with vision and with love. So thank you so much for that. We are going to give you an opportunity to dive into the work. One of the things that we often do is spend a lot of time talking about what is possible. And one of our experiences around this work is to actually find spaces, intentional spaces, to help people to sort of retrain their minds, their hearts, and their spirits in order to accommodate this. And so right after we finished with questions and answers today, we're inviting all of you to step across the quad and join us to do some small group work where a group of facilitators will gather you. We'll give you some great questions that will open you up potentially to learning about yourself and learning about others. But more than anything else, what we want to do is to not make this work scary. Right? What we want to do is to give you a sense of confidence that you actually can have conversations with people who believe differently, who understand the world differently, who have different values. You've seen a lot of problems in our society around this. This is a way that we can begin thinking about how is it that we can tear down some of these walls that divide the human family. So we want to invite you all to experience this curriculum. If you're not able to join us, we can actually give you information about where to download it and to use it in your congregation. Use it in your living room with your family and friends. We want to encourage you to do that. Thank you very much again for this opportunity.
So I invite questions, comments, feelings. Peter, would you like to introduce yourself? Would you like to come to the mic and... You're not going to go to the mic? All right. Okay. Can the mic come to Peter, possibly? Okay. Yeah.
I don't think it'll reach, but would you like to come forward? This has been a day of deep learning for me at Chautauqua. At noontime, I was at Dick Heisenratter's course on early Chautauqua, and I had the insight that Chautauqua is actually the outgrowth of a movement based on fear, because it was founded some 5 to 6 years after the Civil War, which must have been the aftermath of a great upwelling of fear in our country. And the courage, the moral courage of Vincent to have the vision to fight fear with education is the foundation of this institution, and I blessings be upon him for that. On Sunday, I had the courage to step to this microphone and ask whether those who we condemn, those who we demonize as evildoers, are not those individuals for whom we should pray, because they are so filled with fear that they become attracted to and vulnerable to the thrill of evil. Today I'm asking whether there can be the opposite response. In other words, when you are filled with great fear, as your grandparents were, or must have been, whether you can step up and find the energy and the inspiration to engage in a tremendous, inspiring act of moral courage, and whether fear can produce either great evil or great humanity.
Well, we know biologically that when we go to fear, our brains shut down, our hearts shut down, and we act. That was not my grandparents' response. I mean, certainly they had moments like that where they were being chased, or where they were evading, someone who had killed them. And they didn't, it wasn't something that happened overnight. They arrived, and then 2 weeks later, the Nazis invaded, March 15th. So they saw the Nazis come in, and they were very afraid. I think the point of my whole mission in this conversation is really to say that it was the love of humanity that drove them past that fear. It was the love of these people and their desire for freedom that had them go beyond their fear. And that transformation is not easy to engender, but it's very easy to practice. Because when you show love to someone that you hate, you are literally practicing among our greatest prophets' statement about turning another cheek. And I think that practice is something we get to practice every day. So I think that's really the lesson of the Sharps, is that there are abuses happening now. And there are issues happening now that we can intervene in, not necessarily out there, but in our own families, in our own communities.
May we all find the courage to step across our own thresholds.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Artemis.
Amen. Amen. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah. That doesn't go very far, but that one could go. It could be on. Yes, I'll just. We'll get this mic to work for Peter.
Okay. Well, thank you for the movie. I look forward to looking at the longer Netscape version of it. My question is, you spoke about your relationship with your grandmother and told a little bit about what she did after the war. Can you say a few words about your grandfather and what his ministry was like after the war?
Beautiful. Well, first of all, the film is on Netflix. It's free if you have Netflix. It's translated in 5 languages: Portuguese, German, French, Italian. So send it to your cousins in Europe, and it's all over. And it's we're now over 40 million people have seen the film, which is one of the kind of Ken Burns records. It's really special, and entirely because of him that happened. It's an amazing thing. And I'm going to talk about Ken Burns in a moment. I forgot to mention him because his heart is very much at Chautauqua, and this is a very important place for him. But my grandfather's name, think about it, Wait Still. Wait Still. Now, you could say that's just about telling your young son to slow down. But his dad, Dallas Lorsharp, was a professor of English at Boston University. Dallas Lorsharp, and was a friend of John Burroughs and all the great nature writers of that time. And so his son was named Wait Still, because every important moment for them was in nature. They went to nature, they observed nature. My great-grandfather wrote 26 books. And his most famous was read by FDR on radio, called Turtle Eggs for Agassiz. And it was about Agassiz, the professor, very famous professor at Harvard? Yes. See, I'm glad he's here. This is the role we've played together for many years. Who was waiting for these turtle eggs because they didn't want to hatch them until they brought them to Professor Agassiz's office. Anyway, so that was the spirit of my grandfather's upbringing. He was homeschooled. The only book they read was the Bible. He was positioned so he had to read it upside down. So he learned to read the Bible upside down, which I think helped him with his Hebrew later. No, I'm kidding. That was a joke. But I'm saying, he learned to understand the spirit of it, even if he couldn't read it linearly. His ministry always was about this liberation, the spirit that each of us had within us, that really had to be called out individually. And he became very busy not celebrating his work. In fact, I once met a man who was in his congregation in Davenport, Iowa. And he said, your grandfather was our minister for 20 years, and he never mentioned this work in Europe. Once. He never told anyone about it. Because he was so focused on today. What's going on today? And for him, the great tragedy of Christianity was racism. For him, where Christianity failed was that racism was tolerated in any form. You think of Father Coughlin and how he spewed hate, literally, in the guise of Catholicism, we cannot tolerate that in our society. We can't let others have that kind of voice over us. And I think, just to finish that thought, he died, I think, a very satisfied man. And at the end of his life, he did an interview the first time. Imagine, he had kept all those secrets, protecting people since 1939 and 40. To him, he would never disclose who he rescued, how he rescued them, any of the routes they went on. Because the moment someone said, oh yeah, I was rescued, I went over the Pyrenees, we left Port Boo, we went up that hill, who do you think was there the next day? They read the New York Times too. And so that was something he did at the end of his life. And then to know that I cared so deeply about the story as his grandson meant so much to him. So I think he left feeling that the story did have relevance and that it wasn't just a secret anymore, and that others could celebrate him as a man. Yeah, thank you for that. It's a beautiful question. And let's turn our attention to just give a preview of your beautiful life. And we don't have much time, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Let me say two things first. One is that I am going to do a Q&A after the movie, at the movie house. And I think it'll be set up somewhat better. And you can probably figure out a way of getting in at the end without having to pay this. I too can launder money. And the other thing I wanted to say...
These are the skills you learn when you have to be rescued.
The other thing I wanted to say, I would love to meet the gentleman, I think it was, who was a neighbor of Hiram Bingham's. Could you come over to talk to me? Because I'm a great admirer of Bingham's. Tomorrow there's at 12:30 is what?
At the Everett.
Oh, at the Everett House. I will also be doing a little talk with the inevitable PowerPoint 10-minute thing, and then you can ask questions there. And I think that's enough. Thank you for yielding the microphone.
I've never had a greater pleasure. I just wonder if you could tell us if you've done any exploration as to what the difference was between the 17 Unitarian ministers who said no and the 18th who said yes, because I think it's not clear to me to this day why there were those remarkable righteous Gentiles in Europe and your grandparents who had something in them to go to the extent of the moral courage that they showed.
Yeah. Well, it's that lovely Jewish phrase, chutzpah. They had a lot of chutzpah. And I mean that in the best way of that word and what that represents. They were angry. They were really angry about Nazi oppression of Europe and the great culture of Germany that had been decimated by this thug. You know, they were pissed. They didn't want this guy to exist. They weren't going to shoot him, but they were going to go with their hearts and minds. And I think the challenge of doing something against him, and it was personal. It was about him, because that was it. You know, Hitler was the enemy. They went to fight Hitler. And when we named this film, it pissed a lot of people off that we used Nazis. I mean, this is our cover of our film. You know, we use this terrible swastika and what that represents. And, you know, I'm offended in any way that this could be enjoyed. You know, that's where I go to it. Like, no, we're not going to do that. But we're also saying this was an evil, a political evil, like institutional racism, but on a national level. And think about where we could go with our own country. We are at risk of allowing our country to become a fascist state. And until we realize that, we are living in the dark ages. This hall of learning is just pretentious decoration that we're going to say, oh, we had a good time and these are our pictures. And it's not just Trump. And it's not just Netanyahu. And it's not just Putin. It's the combination of all this evilness, of self-interest, of military self-interest, that we have to break. And we need to bring Eleanor Roosevelt's spirit back to the world. And we need to bring the Pope into the world. And we need to call those people, Muslims and Christian and Jews, who are peacemakers, to come forward and do this work. And do it seriously. Like, we don't have time to waste. This is serious. This is similar to that period. And there are the Father Coughlins of today. And we can hear them. And we can't tolerate that. We cannot tolerate that. So I think that sense of enmity, that sense of indignance, that sense of, no, we're not going to tolerate bigotry and prejudice anymore of any kind. Partially because it's so stupid. It's so superficial. What the color of your skin is, or your eyes, or where you're from. You know, like, who cares? You know, and I think the Unitarian faith comes out of this notion that each person is not just important, but really important, really relevant. And we need to bring each other forth together. And then you think about 6 million Jews who were killed and all their lives that we lost. We lost it. Our country lost it. The Jews of America were not up in arms in 1939. They were very happy with their worlds in America. That's the truth. The New York Times, owned by a Jewish family, never published the word Holocaust on the front page of their newspaper. Not until after. What the heck? What was that about? Your people are dying? Oh, no, we don't, you know, that's too controversial to talk about them coming to America. My grandmother went to the State Department in 1940 and said, I have 6 million people who are going to be killed. Where can they go? Oh, Alaska. They need people in Alaska. Let's bring them to Alaska. And she forwarded a bill that didn't win, 64 to whatever. Senator Nye from Wisconsin, the real anti-Semite of that period. No way. Think about that. We had most beautiful hospitals, schools in Alaska today. We'd have 6 million people that could have been saved. And at the Evian conference, Hitler said what he was going to do. He said, I'm going to do this. Get rid of these people. And we did nothing. We, not the government, not FDR, not the State Department. All that blame is BS. And the Jewish community needs to face up to that. They lost their brothers and sisters because they were afraid of their own lives. That is a hard truth. That is a hard truth, but it's true. And my grandmother would go to Jewish rallies all the time and say, what are you doing? What are we doing? So that's, I think, the spirit that we need to waken up for all of us. And I'm so grateful the Muslim community's here. I think we're doing to the Muslims exactly what we've done to African Americans from slavery to Jews. We're doing the same thing all over. We have to stop it. And the only answer is love. We have to go love those Muslims that we know. We have to make new friendships with Muslims we don't know. We have to welcome Muslims to our community. We have to stop this in our homes. Because if we don't do that, it will continue and get worse. So thank you for your question. Yeah.
This week is supposed to be about fear and anxiety and all that, and I think one of the ways of dealing with it more than anything else is empathy.
Yeah.
And I think if we're missing one thing, it's not just understanding, it's not just love, but it's this sense of empathy for your fellow man.
I agree.
And what I find is that, when I did some research on this and found that today, young people are much less likely to be empathetic. Studies that have been done in numbers of universities have come up with the idea that we're 70%, actually, young people today, less likely to be empathetic than they were generations ago. And part of that reason is because people out here, they read. They read novels, they read books, they read things, and they begin to develop this sense of empathy. But when the average college student, after he graduates from college, 50% read no more books, read nothing. And so their identity, their sense of empathy changes. And so it's very easy if you don't have that sense of empathy to say, well, it's not me. It's not me that's being, persecuted. It's not me. But what we need to do, and this is the question, is how do we develop this sense of empathy in our young people to make it so that they really they feel with their hearts, not just with their rational minds. As and Ariely talked about it yesterday. That's what that meant to me was, we sometimes you've got to override the rational, and there is a time for your hearts to come out to these people. And to the things that are happening. So now how do we go about teaching people to be more empathetic?
Beautiful, beautiful. Yay! Well, I think we need to promote this curriculum. I think we need to promote Chautauqua. I think we need to promote events of mutual understanding. I think we need to make friendships in areas that we've never made friendships before. I think all of us should think how many African Americans are in our lives. How many African Americans are here? We should have 30%. Come on, we need more connections in our own lives. And in my community, it's Framingham, which is near Sherborne. And the friends I'm making now are Portuguese, descendant from Brazil. I'm learning Portuguese, we're having more fun. Reach out to these communities and make friendships with immigrants, particularly. And I think that's one of the most exciting things in my life, is my home being a sanctuary, my children growing up in an environment where people are coming in who don't have a place to go. I think it starts in the personal. The personal is political. And I think empathy is something that I would advocate as being better for your life. You'll live longer. You'll be happier. You'll be more successful. You know, I view my bank account, it's not about money, but it's about love. How many assets do I have? How many liabilities do I have? You know, and these are real assets and liabilities of myself, not of my bank account. And so that's where it starts. And I think we have to improve our education system in this country to bring people together of difference and to break down these stereotypes. One thing they found with the Holocaust education is in the middle schools, it stops bullying by 30%. 30%, think about that. And so that's a phenomenon. When you talk about the biggest bully that ever lived, the worst bully, we can connect to that because in that playground there are bullies. And so how do you make that connection between Hitler and what's happening when I go out and play? And how girls are treated and how boys are treated and sexual difference and all these conversations. So yes, your statement was beautiful.
Just a comment to think about. Rome became a dictatorship in one day after the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. The Republic ended and Rome became a dictatorship. Yeah. Amen.
Yeah, wow. That's fear. We have to stop that. Yeah. Yeah, please.
You mentioned that there was a curriculum that was going to be online, and if we can't participate,
Yep.
Could you give us that?
The curriculum is called We Who Defy Hate, and it is located on the website of Meadville Lombard Theological Schools. So it's www.meadville.edu. The curriculum is right on the front page. We Who Defy Hate. You can Google it. Or if you want to walk across the lawn, we can give you a brochure.
And really, the question that we invite you all is find someone you don't know and have a conversation about who inspires you of moral courage. And I'd love to collect all the names by the end of the week. Because if we had a list of all the people in your lives that represented moral courage, and it can include people I don't like Netanyahu, you know, so if you believe he's got moral courage and he does in some ways, that's fine too. But who are those people? Who are those activists? Who are those teachers? Who are the people willing to speak out in your community? And, you know, we have too much work to do. We have to stop sex slavery. Sex slavery is rampant in our country. That is intolerable. It's intolerable that that is allowed to continue in our communities. So there's things that we can take on, that you can take on, that if you know, like to get involved in making your community better, you'll have a lot of fun saving lives. You know, it's really fun. Yes? Oh, here, sorry.
You had mentioned that the Jewish-owned New York Times did not report on the Holocaust, and Jews in America did not rise up about what was going on in Europe. But I think you neglected to mention that Jews were not secure in America at that time. They wanted to prove themselves as loyal Americans, and unfortunately, I think they've made up for it with the Russian, Soviet Jewry. But unfortunately, it was a time when there was a great deal of anti-Semitism in the government also.
I agree. I think it was, I can't imagine what it was like, actually, to be in America as a Jewish family, knowing what you're...
I remember my parents.
Yeah. How horrific. And I feel empathized with you for that very deeply. Yeah. And that empathy can be turned to action. That's my point. Because when you feel that sense, imagine you're Muslim today. Imagine you are illegal and your children have a disability and they can't go home. That's the point of that. So thank you for that. I want to say something. I am a Judeo-Christian. I am a Jew. I believe Jesus was Jewish, right? Is that right? What, right? He came from that tradition. And we agree on that. Can we all agree on that? And that he is a prophet of the Jewish and the Christian and the world. He is not just a singular event. We all are influenced by his Judaism. And I am influenced. And that's the Unitarian tradition. is to see the Judeo-Christian as moral stories of courage or mistakes or lessons, but to view them all as human beings who did that. God is yourself. You're talking to yourself. You're having a conversation with yourself. Now, it might be a higher purpose in yourself, but you're calling your own vision quest. And so that is the Unitarian story that comes out of this Jewish story. Yeah.
I think most people here are either grandparents or great uncles and aunts and things of that sort. And I can only speak to you from a personal perspective, but what can we do? Don't ask the schools to do it. Don't expect a curriculum to do it. What are you doing with these young people and their minds and their feelings and their values? A simple example, every year we take our grandchildren for a week and we take them to places like homeless shelters, and they have to help out there and have them go to different kinds of experiences. Very positive results come out of it. They all are interested in following up. They all have so much more respect for the people that need help. And I would just say to all of you grandparents, grab one of your 8 or 10 or 13-year-olds and take them for a couple days to do some things of this sort. Talk to them about why. It's a very easy thing to do. It doesn't need a curriculum. It just needs your beliefs and your actions. Thank you.
Amen. Hallelujah. Yeah. I'm going to go to her church or your synagogue or your place of worship. I love that. That's exactly the moral of the story. And I think you can all think of examples where this worked. And it's working on many levels today that we don't give credit to. Even though there's oppression of Tibetan Buddhists, there is the Dalai Lama, and he's standing for justice. You know, even though there is oppression in the Catholic Church and there's been terrible problems, there is a Pope who's facing and trying to address that scourge in his own community. I think there's so many examples for me of moral courage that I am overwhelmed with the hope and possibility. And I don't share the doom and gloom of being in a bad spot. I actually believe we are at a precipice of doing something amazing. And it really will be reflected in the values that we share with each other. So.
I did not stand up to say what I'm going to say now, but I want to go on to Congress. When I was a child, my little playmate next door, who was not Jewish, came to my mother and asked a question. Which one of Elaine's cousins killed Christ?
Come on.
I mean, is that...
That is insane. I mean, it just shows ignorance. Like they don't understand the story. You know, the Christian faith is this reinvention of Christ to create a tradition. But it was invented by humans, told in stories.
Of course.
So, I mean, this is...
Before 1962, I suffered in grammar school in the 40s.
Will you just get in line? Get in line, just so we want to finish. So did you finish your point?
Right. I wanted to ask, you said moral courage. How about the 3 Republicans who voted?
Yes. How about those? And women, I mean, that's part of it. You know, part of the story you learn about is my grandmother ran for Congress and was very much treated in a sexist way, a patriarchal way. And you know, we're learning too late that women could have led the world much better in many ways.
I think they would have had more compassion.
Yeah, I agree.
We don't like war.
Right.
But we have a president who said he likes war. I heard him say it. No, but why I came here is to ask everyone to be careful and thinking before you vote for your Congress people. That's where we have to
Amen.
worry.
The woman.
She's allowing me to go forward.
No, but she was.
She allowed me to go forward. It was very kind of her, exactly.
Ma'am, would you pose your question?
She's allowed me, sir, to go in front of her. She's asked me to.
All right.
Okay. I simply want to say that I was born in 1940, and I grew up in the grammar school in the late 40s and the early 50s before the Second Ecumenical Council. And I lived in a mixed Jewish, black, Italian neighborhood. And there were many times when I was surrounded in the schoolyard and asked why I killed their God. So, you know, to talk about that today is just old history.
Ignorance.
We're past that.
We are.
We're past that. We don't know what a Dago is anymore.
I agree. So your last question, ma'am.
Thank you for spreading the love today. You said that when that we talk to ourselves as if God were talking to us?
I was loosely referring to a Unitarian exercise that's used where you really are the reflection of your God, in a sense. And it's largely about learning to love yourself that is missing so much. So I'm not saying that God is yourself, but you are God.
Well, I think that God can be within us.
Yes.
If we pray for him to be within us. And I think that at this time it's important to try to connect with God. And if you ask me who has been motivating me more to do what I am doing, I think that I can say that God has been directing me so that I can help others, because I believe that that is what we are here for.
I totally agree. Let's say.
To Meadville Lombard Theology School and its distinguished president, to our dear Professor Hicks, who will present at 3:30, those who are able to join them in the Hall of Christ. Please be sure to join us in front of the Hall of Mission for the book signing and further opportunity to visit with Artemis. You've blessed Chautauqua today. And there is one comment, one observation I want to make, because one of the gentlemen acknowledged that during the prayer on Sunday, I made a comment during prayer that I think may have been offensive to some. As I prayed for Christians in the Middle East, some of whom feel persecuted, and prayed for Jews who feel under siege, and prayed for Muslims whose faith is being hijacked by evil men. And I was rightly challenged by the courageous gentleman who spoke up today, and I just want to publicly apologize for that comment. If it sounded as if I placed those persons outside the boundary of God's redemption and love, I didn't mean that. And I hear Dr. King's words to me and perhaps to all of us today: never dehumanize the opponent. Never dehumanize your oppressor. Artemis, you've embodied that in the work of your family and your parents, and you've been a blessing to Chautauqua today. Let's thank him again, please.